6 billion years from now, our sun will begin to die. As befits a stellar entity, Sol's death throes will be long, violent, quite beautiful, and very lethal to the 4 rocky worlds that are nestled within its warmth. Earth's inhabitants in those latter days will have to be very clever indeed if they are to save her from Sol's agonal cries. But before we talk about the death of Sol, let's first talk about his birth. 6 billion years ago, when the universe was just half as old as it is now, a giant star blew itself to smithereens. The shockwave from that event eventually slammed into a cloud of neutral hydrogen, spurring it to collapse. New stars were formed out of that collision. Our sun, Sol, was just one of many brethren. Like any child, Sol awoke with a squall. He cried forth a huge stellar wind that cleared away all the dust and gas of the cloud that spawned him. Only the heavier rocks, asteroids, and planets managed to survive Sol's natal breath. After that, Sol settled down into a calm and consistent lifetime of nuclear burning, converting hydrogen into helium. The helium accumulated gradually in his core, and to compensate, Sol grew both brighter and hotter. In fact, Sol is 20% hotter today than he was when the Earth formed. Even today, Sol continues to get hotter and hotter. In a few 100 million years, he'll be so hot that the oceans will start to evaporate. The Earth won't be able to tolerate it. If we're still here by then, perhaps we will launch some giant shades into orbit to block the solar radiation and keep the oceans from drying out. If we're gone, and no one has taken our place, then the Earth will dry out, it will wither, and it will die. But the sun will live on, getting warmer and hotter with every passing year. Eventually, the icy moons of Jupiter will begin to thaw, and Mars will grow warm like summertime. Perhaps some of us will go there for a while to live in relative comfort. But the helium ash in the core of the sun will continue to grow. Eventually, all of the hydrogen in the very center of the core will be exhausted, leaving nothing but helium. Some hydrogen around the outside of that helium will continue to burn in a shell, ever increasing the pressures and temperatures that the helium experiences. It takes a lot to get helium to fuse, but once a certain line is crossed, the helium responds with a vengeance. One day, 6 billion years from now, that line will be crossed, and the helium in the core will begin to fuse into carbon and oxygen. But there's a quirk of quantum physics known as degeneracy that will prevent the energy released by that fusion from increasing the pressure in the core. And that means the core won't be able to expand and cool, so the temperatures will skyrocket, and with them, the rate of helium fusion, leading to a runaway reaction known as the helium flash. In just a few seconds, the energy output of the core will skyrocket by a factor of about 100 billion. The temperatures will soar to the point where degeneracy is lost and normal pressure can exert itself. That pressure will cause the core to expand, and as it expands, it will cool to a mere 100 million Kelvin, where stable fusion of helium into carbon and oxygen can commence. The energy produced by this catastrophe and the subsequent helium fusion is enormous. It will heat the sun, and the sun will grow by a factor of about 100. It will devour Mercury, gobble up Venus, and it will just brush the surface of the Earth. Unless we move the planet, maybe out to Jupiter or Saturn, the Earth will melt, then vaporize. Our planet will be destroyed down to its very bones. For 1 billion years, the sun will continue to grow and then shrink and then grow and then shrink, oscillating in a tortured dance of death. With every pulsation, it will shed away some of its mass into space, surrounding itself with its own funeral shroud. But that dance of death will come to an end. There will be a final oscillation. And then the sun will begin to collapse. For a while, the heat of that collapse will cause it to glow in the ultraviolet. For 10,000 years, it will glow so brightly in the ultraviolet that the shroud around it will begin to glow and will become one of the most beautiful sights you can see in the sky, a glorious planetary nebula, a funeral pyre befitting the majesty of the star that gave us life. But the star will cool and the UV will fade. The shroud will dissipate into the vacuum of space, leaving behind the corpse of Sol, a cinder of carbon and oxygen, a white dwarf star, glowing with the heat of its formation but gradually cooling. For 1 billion years it will be a brilliant gravestone, marking the place where a star once reigned. Of course, a white dwarf star generates no heat of its own, so after billions more years, it will cool down to the temperature of space itself. It will have become a frigid, degenerate ball of carbon and oxygen, an ignoble fate for something so great as a star. This idea of degeneracy, that's actually pretty interesting. We're going to have to talk about that in another episode. Excuse me.